Yes, because I don't have a headset plugged in, do I?
Okay.
That could very well be the problem. Well, you can shout.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, as long as you can hear us enough to interact, I think we'll be okay.
Okay, well, I can try. Certainly, as long as nobody starts barking or something at this end, I can hear you.
Okay.
Well, we might get my cat meowing in the background, so maybe we'll get a whole animal choir going.
Yeah, well, I've got my dog sitting
Yeah.
here, so he can take part too.
Well, I think one thing I wanted to start off with is that today is actually Max's U.S. anniversary.
Is it?
I think it was 34 years ago. The first Blipverts episode was broadcast in the United States.
I had no idea.
Yeah, March 31st, which I think at first we had kind of toyed around with launch dates and whatnot, and so we had discussed, oh, maybe this would be a date for when our first episode would come out. So it's interesting that we actually got you for an interview instead. That's almost better.
Right.
And thank you
Okay.
so much for being willing to speak with us.
Oh, that's all right. Max has always been surrounded by a variety of mysteries and strange meetings and odd coincidences. So this date just works very well. In the late 60s, early 70s, I was working, producing, directing for the BBC, a show called Late Night Lineup. Late Night Lineup was BBC Two show. It started somewhere between 10:30 and 11, and anything could turn up on it. You literally would suddenly find the Prime Minister, then Harold Wilson, sitting there chatting happily away, or you'd find, some maven of the movie industry had turned up, or there'd be a movie that we'd made or something. It was a kind of mini BBC in itself. And so we got a lot of attention from a lot of people who loved the show because it was so unpredictable and wild. You just never knew what was going to be there. But what we didn't know was we had quite a lot of fans who were the kind of people you'd expect to have on the show, not looking at it. Two of these turned out to be Paul McCartney and John Lennon, who you may recall were in an outfit called the Beatles.
I think I've heard of them.
Yeah.
Kind of rings a bell.
Doesn't it? Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Anyway, the upshot of this was that they were about to release their album Abbey Road. And they called us and said, we would like to do something very unusual, that this record releases tomorrow, whatever the day was. How would you like to release it on television the night before? This was about 4 days distant.
Yeah.
And we said, well, how do we do that? And they said, well, any way you like, really. We just love what you do. So we said, right, we'll do it. So we put a team together and in 3 days created a 50-minute live program with all sorts of inserts and bits and cuts and the rest of it. Well, this was Abbey Road. It was released. And of course, there was the usual splendid fuss about it. And it was all very nice. At that time, there was working in the same team as I, a friend of mine called Ian Keel, and Ian and I worked different teams. And, you'd have 3 weeks on and a week off, or whatever it was, to do your shows. And so we did Abbey Road. Ian went and did what he was doing. I then left and went independent to do a movie in London. Late Night Lineup wasn't just a show. It was, in essence, a sort of unofficial production outfit, because we did documentaries, we did films, we did drama. Up Sunday with Willie Rushton and also the usual gang. And so we did that just as standard lineup show, but designed for Sunday. So it's a little more light entertainment-y than any of the others.
Yeah. Some of the descriptions online made it sound like it was kind of controlled chaos at times.
Well, that was our speciality.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, well, and I know, I guess it mentions you also did a little bit of Rutland Weekend TV.
Absolutely, yeah, with Eric Idle, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, it makes sense because it seems like all that same crew is all doing TV together.
Well, Rutland Weekend came out of the late night lineup as well.
Oh,
Those things originated with the late night lineup gang, which were, I don't
yeah.
know, 50 of us or something, I suppose. And we had this extraordinary limit, which was do whatever's good. And I think I've said before, you couldn't do it now because the control, at the pocketbook end is so tight. So late night lineup became lineup Sunday. It became Rutland Weekend Television. It became, my God, it became a cooking program at one point. I mean, they had all these little spin-offs, and of course, famously, the Old Grey Whistle Test.
That's right. I think you mentioned that last time too.
The Old Grey Whistle Test was the biggest music show on television. I mean, for playing stuff, Mike Appleton produced that, and all this was like lineup. It all came from it was like having your own BBC, and they were very pissed off about it. I might tell you. So there were, late night lineup produced a whole swath of stuff, and of course we also used to go out and do what you'd call documentaries, but we always did documentaries without commentary, stuff like that. The material had to speak for itself. And so we'd go off and do 40, 50-minute long shows. We also did, right at the beginning of, I don't know if you ever remember Silent Spring. It was at the book that was at the beginning of the environmental movement, 1970, something like that.
Oh, yes.
Rachel, anyway, the lady who wrote it, it was all about pesticides. And we had got hold of this idea and I'd read a book called A Population Explosion by Paul Ehrlich, which was a very doom-laden assessment of the fact that we were breeding ourselves out of existence and that there would be huge famines, huge refugee crises, all of this stuff going on, lots of which we're coming to see. Climate problems, all of this was sort of thrown into it. And I decided, through the late night lineup mechanism again, it'd be great to do a series of shows about each element of this very, very new movement, which in those days was just called the environment movement. So we did population, we did pollution, consumption, overconsumption, all that. So we did 6 programs, but we designed them as a newscast. So not boring old stuff about people saying, this is going to happen, this is going to, but we said, okay, this just happened, and this is the news. Well, in the UK at that time, the news was read by one person too. And when commercial television got going, they used what was called the American method, where you'd have 2 broadcasters, and they'd shoot it one together. So we used that because it was snappier, and then put together a whole load of footage and stuff, and created these sort of 40-minute newscasts about the issues of the environment as if they had just happened. And to our astonishment, we got this massive mailbag, as they called it, letters from viewers. They had letters in those days. It was a piece of paper you wrote on it. I just have to be clear because not everyone knows. And so this was absolutely huge. It was like the War of the Worlds all over again, because all the people go, my God, we didn't know this was happening. And is it real? And all the rest of it.
Right.
So we did this was just one program, but we turned it into a series of 6 when it finished. And at the end of it, we did, in 71, it was exactly the time, which we were utterly unaware of, that the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, it was called Only One Earth. And they got all the nations of the world together in Stockholm. And Sveriges Radio, which was the television outfit that operated in, it's the state outfit that operated in Sweden, contacted the BBC and said, this is too big for us. There's thousands of people coming. The story's massive. Would you come over and cover it? Bring your big team and do it. And the BBC said, environment, what's that? Some sort of it. Some new fad that you Swedish people have got. And they didn't do it. The documentary department and features department, all that, they just sort of said, come on, what is it? Well, they, for some reason, which I never fully understood, got hold of a late night lineup, and our boss then, Rowan Ayres, who was a wonderful guy, and he literally called me in one day and said, do you want to go to Sweden and cover the World Conference on the Human Environment? And I went, yeah, great. Sure, okay. When? He said, go this afternoon, take a team. We had Mike Dean, there were 4 of us went. And we were expected to, do our best to send material back. And in, I think it was 10 days we were there, wow. 4 people, 10 days. We did 3 50-minute live programs and a 90-minute documentary.
That's fantastic.
I mean, as I recall, we drank wine and a smorgasbord, and I don't think we slept for 2 weeks. I mean, I just don't think we could have.
Right.
And that's when Andrew Gosling, my old film editor, I said to Andrew one day, Andrew, I can't shoot this stuff. You're going to have to shoot it. He said, I don't know how to shoot stuff. What do you do now? And off he went. And then he became a director, a producer, and had his own career at the BBC. And, it was that kind of crazy, we were in our 20s for crying out loud, nothing was impossible, and we were immortal. What was
exactly?
We had long beards and long hair, and anybody in a suit was automatically abused, which is why we were not popular at the BBC, I might do.
But that's such a 20-year-old attitude, though. Like, I think both
absolutely.
Heather and I can relate to that quite a bit.
Yes, since you both are 20, yeah. But that was the sort of carry on, that happened, and you got those opportunities because Late Night Lineup was itself capable of generating those sort of opportunities. Nothing to do with the BBC. So it wasn't that we were creating another crazy type of program. We were already involved in what was a sort of 5th column BBC.
Right.
4 teams, we could do anything. You literally had an idea, just said, Rowan, I'd like to do that. And he'd said, off you go.
Wow. I guess whatever, as long as you're willing to shoot the camera, then do it.
I truly don't think I ever heard the word budget mentioned in all the years I was there.
Wow.
It was just, if it's worth doing, do it. And we trust you. And as Rowan said, I don't hire dogs that go around barking. If these guys screw it up, they get fired. If not, I leave them to it. And that's what he used to do.
It's such
he would never use terms because he was a gentleman.
Right.
But that's what he did. He covered us over and over again. And so they got the result. So a lot of weird stuff came out of Late Night Lineup. Film Night, Barry Norman's Film Night, that came out of Late Night Lineup. Tony Bilbo in those days was presenting it. So a lot of those great shows emerged from the Late Night Lineup stable, as it were.
Very cool.
So the answer is no. We weren't all involved in any more weird shows. That was the weird show. But the past is a foreign country and or a foreign land, more accurately. Things cannot possibly happen now that were very much run of the mill then. I mean, the idea, when we did this thing for the United Nations conference, because we were trying to do live shows simultaneously, we're shooting footage, using it for live shows, and building the documentary, which, by the way, was a documentary without commentary. It had to speak for itself, because that was the technique we were sort of promoting in those days, because most BBC stuff had this sonorous voice telling you what to think, and we thought, the pictures and statements should do that. Well, in order to think about it, in order to make that documentary work, Andrew and I had to go back to Sweden because in those days you shot on 16mm and all your film was this long and trims with sound. And all that. Right. So you had a room 2 or 3 times the size of this study, with just trims everywhere.
Oh,
and
yes.
You had to get them off the hook, cut and paste, all that, stick it together and so on. Well, imagine the time it takes to find this. When you discover on arrival in Sweden that they've lost all the transcripts. And none of the brown tape can be allied to any celluloid.
Oh, no.
And you have to start again for hour after hour going through trying to find stuff that might fit. I mean, it was a nightmare, but we did it. But the point is, it took time.
Yeah.
And it took longer than we'd been given 2 weeks to cut it. We needed 6 months, but we've been given 2 weeks. Thank God for that. Well, the first week was trying to find the material.
Right.
And only could this have happened with a Rowan Ayres at the helm. He called me and said, I've just been hauled over the coals at Programme Review, Attenborough, Weldon, the whole lot. What the hell you guys are doing out of here? You've got to come back. I said, we can't come back, Ron. We've got this stuff all over the walls and machines. We had 5 cutting machines running in 5 offices.
Wow.
And we had a tape of Status Quo, I think it was, running outside the building in round a Soundhead, outside the building in round a Soundhead. We had this lot going out of sync, 5 versions while cutting the thing, you know.
Oh.
There was the odd bottle of wine going around as well, I recall. But anyway, that was the kind of madness in which we were working to try and get this thing done. So we needed 6 months. We ended up with 1 week to do it. And he said, you've got to come home. They're giving me a rough time. We just said, we're not going home. We're going to finish it off. He said, you can't do that. So we both resigned.
Who's going to stop us?
Right. And I said, I resign on the spot. That's it, right? And Andrew, who had 2 new babies and a mortgage, shouts from the other side of the room, that goes for me too. Andrew's resigned as well. Cheers, bang. This is true. This is absolutely what happened. He and I stopped work instantly, went and bought a bottle of wine and went to the park. And we sat and drank the wine and said, you know something, we're here now until the money runs out, which won't be long. But at least let's take 1 day off. First day off.
Right.
And the following morning, the phone rang at 6 o'clock a.m. We were in the cutting room because we lived in there. And it was Rowan Ayres. And I said, Rowan, whatever you do, don't start. We're not coming back. He said, I'm trying to tell you, if you just shut up for a minute. I spoke to Attenborough and he said, screw it, let them do it. So you're on, keep going. Thank you, Ron. Click. And now you couldn't do that now.
No.
And everybody would be lined up and shot and fired, and there'd be all this fuss going on. But people just dealt with things differently, I think.
Yeah. Well, I love this image too of you guys like blasting rock and roll while you're doing all this too. It's just like we got to get the work done. We might as well have some fun too, you know.
It was tremendous. They actually had the Swedes, who were very, very beautiful to us. They're lovely people. They had a notice handwritten and put on the door, do not feed the Englishmen.
Oh, that's perfect. Oh, I would say, what other kind of music did you guys listen to when you guys would work like that?
Well, the AC/DC, Status Quo, all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever came up, it was a lot of it was whatever we could find and get transferred. So it was just stuff lying around, really.
I think I only recently discovered Status Quo, but they're pretty good.
Yeah, I think it was just we needed something going on in our brains other than what we're doing, because that was hard. And but it was much like doing Max when we were here. We worked for a year without a day off, basically Saturdays, Sundays, Christmas, nothing mattered. It was, you have to do the show, and it's fun to work like that. It's a joy to work that hard and all the rest of it. And now I think I think people are very capable of doing that now, but I don't think they're required to. There's so many rules and regulations about you going mad and needing a psychiatrist or something, which I'm sure we all do. But some of it ended up on screen. That sort of stuff would happen on lineup a lot. Did I not tell you about the night we didn't have a program?
I don't
Everything
think
collapsed.
No, yeah.
Well, I don't know. This was somewhere in the 70s, I suppose. And we had some, I think it was interview programs built around some theatre production or something, and that all folded up. Our backup show that we had created hadn't come out of the cutting room in time. And as the day went on, because we'd come at 10 in the morning and 12 hours later had to be on air, how that sort of thing goes.
Yeah.
And this was often with lots of people and pictures and inserts. And I mean, there was a hell of a lot going on. And 2 o'clock came and 4 o'clock came and 6 o'clock. Everything we touched turned to crap as we touched it. I mean, just reach out and poo everywhere. And at 6 o'clock, with 4 hours to go to transmission, and we're supposed to put a 1 hour show on, the three of us were sitting looking at each other saying, we better get to the bar and start thinking because we haven't got anything.
Right.
So we did. And the names don't mean much to you, so I won't bother with them. But there was the presenter and the three of us on the team. And we sat in the bar and had a drink. Tom Corcoran is the name you should know, wonderful director. And suddenly this idea emerged. And we thought, can we get away with it? Oh, let's try. So we went off our separate ways, some to get graphics, some to find a specific graphic. And what we did was we got Thomas Landseer's Victorian painting, The Stag at Bay. You may know it as Monarch of the Glen. It's the stag like this, and it's all purple heather and this great beast.
Yeah.
And it's kitsch, but it's a very renowned piece of painting. And we found it. We didn't look for it. We looked for just any famous painting, but there it was in the BBC library. So we got this, mounted it, stuck it on a camera stand, and Mike Dean, who was the presenter, sat down, and to the 500,000 people, or however many it was that viewed Late Night Lineup every night live, he said, this evening we're going to do a major experiment in contemporary notions of what art is. We're going to allow you to have on your living room wall a great work of art to enjoy, and did this wonderful to-camera piece that we cut to the Stag at Bay. There was no music. There was not even white noise. There was just total, unforgivable for the BBC, utter silence. So if you turned it on, you'd think the sound had died. But here's the Stag at Bay. And we ran it for 30 minutes. Without commentary, without explanation, nothing. So everybody in the land was turning it on and going, what's this then? And of course, they're all sitting there going, there'll be a gag in a minute. I know that. Somebody will say something, or something will appear in the picture. Look at, hey, Ethel, have a look at this. Is there something going on in the picture? And we just let it sit for 30 minutes. And then after 30 minutes, ran credits. Credit roller. That was it. And Mel Oxley, suddenly remembered Mel's name. He was the announcer that linked programs in those days. Had this very wonderful, rich, plummy voice. And he said, as the program finished, and they went to weather or whatever, another first from Late Night Lineup. Let's see how many of them are left in the morning. And of course, it was all over the press and everything. People couldn't get over it. They thought half of all the Conservatives were also outraged at this waste of BBC funds, and the other half of the land was saying, "Fucking great, do it again," Yeah. So one was able to do stuff then that I don't think you could dream of doing now.
Yeah.
Just financially.
This sounds like something out of like Gurney Slade or Max Headroom itself, where like that sounds like an experiment that Edison would try to champion, and like Murray would be like, no way.
Right. Yeah, I'd never thought of it like that, but you're right. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, that's
Murray
fantastic.
would have to be sensible about it, and yeah.
Well, and this the story about the environment series, it seems particularly fascinating to me, because one element from Max that I always like to point out is whenever they go outside, there's always the red pollution skies up above, and it's almost never
good.
It's almost never commented on. It's almost never, it's like, but like very clearly they live in this world that's been very poorly polluted. And it's interesting to see that this is like an interest and a passion of yours for quite a while, that it's in a lot of your work.
I suppose it is, but again, unconsciously, like so much of it. You use that word career, and somebody said to me, literally 2 weeks ago, a fellow I've known since he was a kid, actually, and he said, I'm 32 years old, and I can't quite seem to how I'm going to get my career together. How do you get your career together? And I had to tell him, I am absolutely the worst person in the world to ask, because I've got no bloody idea at all. I've always seen a career, in my view, is you've come through this forest, you got to the other side, and you look back and you go, oh, that was it.
Yeah,
but at the time, you've got no idea what you're doing, the people you meet. I started at the BBC selling second-hand cars. That's not a recommended career path. If you want to get into the BBC television, go and try and sell some broke down old cars and make 10 quid each so you can pay the rent. That's how you've got. And I don't have to go to film school. No, go to motor trade school. Yeah.
This is what I love is everybody has a different story about how they get into their there's like I mean, I think especially as a young person you have this idea in your head of like, oh yeah, a thing happens to you and then you start your career. And it isn't until I think you do reach middle age where you're kind of like, oh, I'm already like 20 years into my career.
And it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And then you look back and go, it did. It must have been that thing then, because then that. And I don't think that, careers I think are for accountants and priests.
Yeah.
I don't know that show business has a career.
There's probably a better word that we need to come up with for that, like you're something that's not quite as goofy as Journey or something like that. But
how about the phrase "getting lucky"?
There you go.
Wow.
That's the screaming truth. It's if you hadn't been there when that phone rang,
Right.
if you'd actually gone for a pee instead of being sitting at the desk and you go, yeah, who, what, bingo, you're off. Honestly, that's as close as it gets to planning. When I was working, I suppose the launch point of all this was those early days at the BBC. But when I was there, we worked late night, dine up, but we worked 3 weeks on and a full week off. Well, I was always repairing old boats or sailing old boats or getting drunk in pubs with fishermen. I mean, it wasn't as if it was one or the other, it was both. And we were able to weave them together. And that was very important for me, because I didn't ever get stuck getting on the train into London every day. I would do that for a period of time, and then boom, I could stop and go back to walking the dog or sitting in a plank in the boat, whatever. So I've never seen it as a choice between the career or that, because in any case, I'd have chosen that every time rather than career.
There's something more appealing about being on the boat, isn't there?
There is. The company's one thing, but
right.
There's lots of other good stuff too. We had the company cookers the other day. They were a very good company.
I like that too about like being able to walk back and forth between the different worlds too. Like you're not stuck in one or the other. Like. Because I imagine the other side of it is true too. That if you're on the boat every day, forever, that wears off eventually.
Yeah, it might. I don't know. It hasn't worn off for me yet, but I know it had to be like that. It was always sort of gone from one to the other. I mean, they've been practiced at a time like everybody in this business. Where you go 6 months without work. But you've got to enjoy that. You can't be sitting there panicking, going, "Oh Christ, it's all over," because actually, well, maybe it is. And but then once you're rolling down that road, you keep meeting different fellow travelers, and things start to come together and go apart and come together and go apart. And I keep hearing people saying things like, "What am I going to do when I retire?" And I keep thinking, you must be out of your brains. You're going to change your whole life because you're not going to go to that office. You're going to die. You're going to die of disappointment, overexertion, something. You should be doing what it is you want to do all the time, and consider the other thing as a way to make it possible. Because that way I think you keep fresh.
I like this. We get a little philosophy too. This is perfect.
Right. It's good stuff on work-life balance, which is a big thing.
Science philosophy, PHI. That's how it should be spelled.
Which came first? Did you already know members of the Bonzo Dog Doodah band, or did you meet them as part of working at the BBC?
Well, I met Vivian at the BBC, and on one of the shows, Vivian came in, and I don't know if you know much about Vivian Stanshall, but he was an immensely brilliant and deeply difficult human being. But I always hit it off very well with him, and nobody else would work with him. It was as simple as that. And then he said, "Christ, you know, Vivian, give it a go, because none of us are going to go anywhere near the studio." And I entered the studio and found Vivian in a coffin with the lid down, fortunately, because he was naked. And he had been having an awful lot of fun,
Wow.
destroying people's lives professionally in his career. Anyway, we just got together again and discovered we still enjoyed each other's company enormously, and it went from there.
What's kind of interesting about this is that you're working obviously, and so I'm curious what made you attractive to the team that was making Max Headroom. Like, was it just your reputation, or was there something specific that they were like, oh hey, we want to get this guy on?
Well, the truth about that is that the team, so-called, that was putting Max Headroom together was in chaos. There was this this idea, this concept that was supposed to service a video clip show, popular music video show. And Channel 4 had been looking for a very long time to find a way to do this. And somebody came up with the idea, well, let's make it into a robot. And from the robot had come the idea that this could actually be a living person downloaded into a computer. And that is about as far as it had got. And they had two versions of a screenplay. And the producer, Peter Wagg, was getting very desperate. And he said to my agent, who have you got that will understand this stuff? And she thought it would be me. That's all that happened. And I read it and really, really didn't like it. It was like a very kind of schoolboy version of robots running around shooting at things. It was just awful. And I said so, and he said, yeah, I know, that's the trouble. And none of us like it. And what the hell can we do with it? And I said, I've got no idea. We better meet. So we did. And we met in a pub. I, in those days, tended to wear scruffy clothes, well, I still do, I suppose, and long hair and ponytails, and he was in a suit. So we just didn't get on. I mean, instantly it was obvious that we were, both from different teams. But we had a beer, talked about the idea, and I found the idea then electrifying. The idea that in some way or other that there would be an accident and somebody's brain would get into a computer, and what could you do with that? And so we just started riffing literally in the pub on what we might do. So the next day I met with the two directors, which was its own interesting world, and they said, well, we still don't know what to do. And we all went to find the answer from a man called Colin Wilson, a writer. Look him up, writer in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And he'd been doing some work on dual minds and the capacity for people to have left and right brain thinking. He'd written an article in one of the Sunday newspapers. We went to the southwest of England, stayed at Fawlty Towers. It should have been Fawlty Towers. There was the most aggressive human that ever ran a hotel. Wouldn't let us make phone calls unless we paid for them in advance. I mean, it was a bizarre setup. But we met with Colin Wilson, and Colin was wonderful. And he began to give us a sense of how we could make a mind like that work. And his son, who was about 10, I think, suggested that we make the lead scientist 12 or 14 years old. So all of the Max Headroom that we ended up with came from all sorts of different inputs. There was no body who created Max. It evolved as we went. And so we spent a week down there. Every morning we'd spend chewing over ideas frantically. I would take notes, try and put the notes into some sort of coherent shape in the afternoon. And then we'd go ahead again the next day. And that's how it all came together. And when we got back to London, basically they said, well, look, there's a pile of notes and a pile of ideas. Can you do something with it? And I vanished for 20 days and wrote what became Max Headroom. Simple as that. It really was no more complex. When I started writing it, I had only the vaguest idea of where it might go. And that idea came from those meetings that I talked about. And we had a lot of fun, to be honest, while we were doing it too. and so the directors, the two directors, said, "Well, we want to see something." Well, any writer knows that the first 3 or 4 pages of what you write end up being the final pages that you always change to account for what you wrote later. But I was told I had to send the pages in, and I said, "Well, Christ, this is just a rough first draft. Send the pages in." So I, in those days, faxed in the pages. And their response was, "Oh, this is great. This is just what we're looking for." So that gave me the confidence to go ahead and go, right, to hell with it. I'll just write this the way I think it should be, and we'll see what changes later. And the simple answer to that was nothing changed, because it was shot as written. There were no notes ever given. First time in my life I've ever experienced it. They just took it and went and started shooting it. Mine, they didn't have much time. I think they got the money together in no time and had to go and do it. And Rocky and Annabelle, who directed it, were brilliant visualists. That was their terrific power. They knew how to create imagery in the sort of way that Ridley Scott became famous for doing. They had that tremendous capacity, and I think that's what helped to get Max really so impactively on the screen.
Now, I know that from the point of which you took the job to write the script for the telefilm to the point where Max was basically completely over in the United States, you had a huge period of creative work where you not only were like producing all these scripts and producing the show, but you changed locations, you moved to another country. I can only imagine that this left a bigger impact on you, not just creatively, but like in your life. What happened after Max Headroom? Like, did you have some time to readjust to the world of the United States?
Well, yes, that readjustment took some doing, but it took 3 days. Basically, I came over originally because I was telephoned by the producer, Peter Wagg, who had previously come over to the States, got a deal together with Coca-Cola, and with Lorimar, the production company, and put all this together. And they'd done what they always do, rewritten it, and as usual, screwed it up. So now they were in a panic because the original script, which was basically the same as the one that had been shot in the UK, but had brought over none of the people who shot it, because there'd been a big legal kerfuffle, of which, frankly, I knew nothing and still don't know much. But there was much, howling and screaming about creative rights and who owned what and all the rest of it. And these things always devolve into that sort of chaos if you're not very careful. So he just said, "Will you come across and put it back the way it was, please? It'll take you 2 or 3 days, and they want different act breaks in it." And that was it. So that's all I did. I literally arrived with a tiny bag with some toothpaste and underwear in it, and was staying for 3 or 4 days. That's when they said, if you were to do another one and make this a series, what would it look like? And of course, we were floored because we'd never considered this as an idea at all. And we sat down again in a pub and went, what the hell are we going to do? So we came up with an idea, and I sat down and wrote this thing. It took 3 days, literally, just day and night, with bottles of wine and sandwiches, and just go, 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 go. He took it to this meeting, and they ordered a series, 13, off the top. And he called me and said, "They've just ordered 13. You can't go back to England anymore." And I said, "Well, what the hell happened?" He said, "Well, it was a bit amazing, really." He said, when they asked us, to provide something which should show what we'd do if we did another one and further ones down the series, they expected 1 page, 3 paragraphs, acts 1, 2, and 3 would look something like this. And instead, I handed them a 52-page script that we'd knocked off in 3 days, and they just said, "That's it, we'll do it." So we'd done quite the wrong thing. They only wanted 1 page. Well, the point is, that was all happening because that was happening because none of the original production entities had come across, me included. I wasn't originally invited to come any more than Rocky and Annabelle and all the other people who were involved. Only Matt Frewer, the actor, was brought over. But once there, and once that had happened, I was kind of stuck with it. And as soon as we went into production, I had no intention of staying, to be frank. I was very happy doing what I was doing in England. But went into production, and one day, through the internal Lorimar mail, I received a little check. And I went into the next office, much grander than mine, because it was the producers, of course, palm trees and secretaries and all that stuff. And I said to Peter Wagg, I said, I don't get this. I didn't even read the contracts that you told me to sign. You said they were all right, so I just trusted you. I said, but why are they paying us for a whole year in one check? I don't get it. And he looked at me, he said, you silly bugger, that's this week. So I stayed.
Wow.
That's how it happened. And as you implied, yes, bit of a life changer. Because in the UK, you don't, or didn't then anyway, work for the money. You work because you love doing it, and it was a great way to earn a fairly decent living, but that was about it. And all of a sudden, you come to America and discover people actually pay you to do things. And this was very seriously life-changing. And I couldn't get over the fact that in California they polished trucks. That was the biggest astonishment for me.
Now, I getting back to Max, from the documentary stuff that I saw on the DVD, it seems like you worked pretty closely with Michael Cassett after the project kind of got up off the ground and running. What was that working relationship like?
I still see Mike. We've remained in touch over all these years. The problem with Max was it was a very English concept, which is to say that it was deeply cynical, self-effacing in many ways, and it had a kind of a very dark sense of humor, but also it let go of almost every convention you could ever think of. Well, American television was not then like that. It was very, very, it would have been an impossible sell had we not already made it in England. And Stu Bloomberg, who was head of development for ABC, had seen it and loved it. You wouldn't have sold it off the paper, I don't think. Well, the consequence of that was that when it came to find writers, because I couldn't write 13, I did the first and the last or something, and we had to fill in the middle, obviously. Writers who had that same sensibility were very, very hard to find. In fact, almost impossible. And I interviewed dozens of them and came away all the time going, God, is there nobody who can see the fun in this and see the wit in it? They were also desperately bloody serious about it all. And it was Mike Cassett who was the first guy who walked into the room and said something or other, and I thought, maybe this bloke has got a grip, on what we can do with it. And we started to talk, and I suddenly realized, this is it. Mike's the man. Mike was the only fella really who got it, to be honest, and he got it totally, and wrote some of the very, very best stuff, I think. So I still see Mike. He writes books and science fiction books and all the rest of it, by the dozen. They seem to pour out of him. So he had all the right entry points for Max, unlike anybody else that I ever found, actually. Even William Gibson.
That's excellent to hear. Wow.
Well, no, not that William Gibson was not up to writing Max. It's just he was so far ahead of us, in orbit. Gibson was remarkable. But there was a funny story about him. Was we were both on a panel at some science fiction do in San Francisco, I think it was. And two things astonished me. The first was that walking around in this conference, I met 5 people with my name on their badges. I mean, it stunned me completely. I had no idea that people did this sort of thing, but there they were all saying to me. And so I engaged one in conversation. I had the most wonderful conversation about how Max Headroom started with somebody who'd never been there. I mean, it was a sort of insane world. Anyway, the second thing was that when we were on the panel, somebody said, asked us through the moderator, how come you guys know so much about computing? You're so far ahead of the world of computing. How do you know? And I immediately shuffled this off onto William Gibson because, he knew stuff. And he immediately shuffled it back to me. And so I was very embarrassed. I had to confess that I had written Max Headroom on a $30 portable typewriter in England because I didn't know how to turn a computer on. And I didn't. And it took me a lot of time to work out how to do that. Even more confusing for me was how to turn it off, because I could never find the off button until some sweet lady in LA said, you press start. That's when I realized that my relationship with computers was never going to work, because to press start, to stop it, lost me completely. Well, what was interesting was William Gibson then confessed. He said, well, I'm afraid I'm in much the same situation. I wrote Neuromancer on an old office typewriter. He couldn't turn one on either. So the answer was, the reason that we know...
That's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, but the answer was, the reason that in my case, certainly, I knew so much about computers is because I knew nothing about them and therefore was completely unfettered in what I could imagine that they could do. So even now, I'm deep into the whole artificial intelligence thing, and I'm in the middle of a whole book about it, writing a book about it, or at least which involves it, which kind of takes Max on as a concept way, way beyond where we ever are allowed to get him. But I still know nothing about computers. Every time I go near one, it gives up automatically. That goes for telephone, anything at all. I think the buggers know what I know, and they're trying to stop me.
That
This is something Heather can relate to.
Oh, really?
With my tech issues, yes, I have too many tech issues. It's a terrible issue in my life.
Good. Well, I'm glad I found somebody else.
Yep, homework, can't do anything.
Yeah, me too.
Yep, happens a lot.
Interesting. Only last week I read that one of the other things that we came up with, which was meat being grown in vats, has actually happened, and they're now growing chicken meat without chickens. And our joke was that it was grown in vats and it was injected with relishes at source. You see, so you could create cows that already had ketchup in them and things like that. Well, this is just extrapolation. That's all we were doing. Basically, we were getting drunk and extrapolating.
And you're extrapolating very well too, because as we have noticed watching the first 6 episodes, living in the 21st century, especially in 2021, feels very much parallel to 20 minutes into the future. Like, we're stuck at home, we're talking on screens, there's still very huge class disparities, the homeless problem, pollution. When I watch it, I'm constantly not shocked by things I'm seeing in this show because it's a reality outside.
Yeah, and again, we used to joke about having network 23 networks. Can you imagine that? Well, there are 500 now. And as I've pointed out before, mostly crap on all of them.
Well, certainly I noticed that when you're working on the United States version of the show, you have a few different credits. You're a writer, you're executive story editor. I think you were a producer on one episode. I know how television works as well, where you're often doing a lot more than the credits reveal. Were there other interesting jobs you did behind the scenes on Max?
No, I just didn't have time to do anything but write the stuff and try and get it written, quite honestly. It was a task. It was a very serious task. I mean, I don't think anyone took a day off for 2 years. That included Christmas and every Sunday. You just had to keep on working, and that's part of that game. It's why it's so entertaining to be in entertainment, because your commitment to something is so absolute, your enthusiasm is total. Your personal life just falls apart because you have to pull this thing off and make it happen. So no, there wasn't much else other than keep writing and keep thinking, and far too much drinking, probably.